Good morning and welcome to Coffee and the Word. You know, sometimes deliverance is difficult. You know, it seems like, sorry, let me gather my thoughts for a second. It seems like when God decides to do something big or when God decides to rescue his people, it's not an immediate reality. God takes us through stuff before deliverance happens. And so God has called Moses and he says, I've heard the cries of my people. I've heard what they're going through. I've heard the oppression that they're enduring. I know it's tough for them, right? And I could spend a whole lesson, but I think I've already done that. But I want to make sure you understand that God is hearing your cries. God is hearing your oppression. God is hearing what you're going through. And I think it's really dangerous for us to believe that somebody is going to come rescue us without God doing the hearing, right? And so the Israelites have been oppressed by the Pharaoh in Egypt. He's become harder and harder. In fact, I bet they would say it can't get any worse than this until it does. And so Moses and Aaron show up in Egypt and they go to see the Pharaoh and they say, Pharaoh, let my people go. Let my people go. Sorry. You don't need to hear me sing. But anyway, so they come in and they're like, you need to let my people go so they can serve. And because of the request, here's how Pharaoh responds. Afterwards, this is chapter 5 of Exodus. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness. Pharaoh says, who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let the people go. So already, I'm guessing, I don't know this, but I'm guessing Moses, after his whole encounter with God and the burning bush and everything, he saw the bush was burning and it didn't burn up, and him and God were having this conversation. Moses is like, I don't want to go. And Moses is like, you're going to go. And he's like, I don't want to go. And you're going to go. He's like, I'm not good enough. He's like, I'll be with you. Because I don't talk well enough. I'll send Aaron with you. I can't, how are they going to believe me? I'll give you these signs. And so all of that happened. So I believe that Moses walked into Egypt even though God told him that Pharaoh would not relent. God warned him. It's like, you're going to go in, you're going to tell him all this, he's going to act like he's going to do it, but he's not going to do it. I know Pharaoh, I know what's going to happen, right? And so Moses goes in and he's like, let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, I'm not going to let your people go. In fact, I'm going to turn your people against me. I'm going to oppress them even more. And so after he had done this, here's what he says. He says, get back to work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous and you are stopping them from working. The same day Pharaoh gave this order. The same day Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and the overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they're crying out. Let us go and sacrifice to our God and make them work even harder. And so, there's this deliverer who has showed up to give Israel this promise, right? It's about to change. God is delivering you, and then it gets harder. And that's kind of where I want to camp out today with your encouragement. I know that sometimes it feels like what God is doing takes way too long. We need to remember that our timing is not God's timing. Our way of doing things isn't God's way of doing things. His ways are higher. That I think sometimes when we're calling out to God, we put him on trial, right? We're like, God, why aren't you doing it this way? Or why aren't you doing it that way? Like, I expected you to show up and make it, just fix everything. But if you're a student of Scripture, God rarely shows up and just fixes everything. God usually goes through a process. He partners with man to accomplish his goals. And here's one crazy thing. God could have, just like that, shifted Pharaoh by just making Pharaoh do something. But instead, he goes through a process. So Pharaoh still has a choice. Granted, by the end of all of this, it's not much of a choice. But you'll notice Moses and Aaron come in as diplomats. You need to let my people go. We're just going to go out and worship in the festival. And of course, Pharaoh declines. Not only does he decline, he thinks these people have too much time on their hands. They've got time enough to cry. They've got time enough to work even harder. And so he takes away their straw and he keeps the quota just as high. But I want you to listen to what happens to the people of Israel. He says, then the Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh. And this is verse 15. Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet you are told to make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is your own people. Pharaoh said, lazy. That's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce a full quota of bricks. The Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble when they were told you are not to reduce the number of bricks required for each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And then they said, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. And so now, here's what happens to a lot of us, right? In the process of God's deliverance, we begin to doubt God's deliverance because sometimes we have to go through the mire to get to the meadow, right? We've got to go through the muck and the mud to get to the beauty. And so I want to encourage you, I don't know where you're at in your stage of seeking deliverance from God, but sometimes when God is doing a deliverance, it gets harder. Sometimes the oppression is greater. In fact, I dare suggest the closer you draw near to God, the more Satan will draw attention to you. But here's the beautiful thing, and here's the thing I want to encourage you about. The scripture is very plain. If we draw near to God, he will draw near to us. The scripture is very plain. He hears the cries of his people. The scripture is very plain also that Satan is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. But listen, if you resist him, he will flee from you. You have the tools in your arsenal to overcome this kind of doubt and uncertainty. You have the power, you have the weapons, you have the ability to stand in the oppression until God's deliverance is complete. Now here's the beautiful thing. Pharaoh doesn't let his people go, let God's people go. And then God begins to make a move. And then we get to see the mighty work of God through the oppression, not apart from it. I know that sometimes it feels like you're alone, but you're not. I know that sometimes it feels like you've been abandoned. You haven't been. I know that sometimes it feels like God must not be working or God must be judging us. Sometimes what feels like judgment is God operating deliverance. And so I don't know who needed to hear this today, but I felt like some of you did. I know that I needed to hear it today. So I'm going to let God do the finished work that he's promised. And I'm going to trust him. And I'm going to walk where he tells me to walk. And I'm going to hope where he tells me to hope. And I'm going to look for what he promises. I hope you'll do the same. This has been another edition of Coffee and the Word. Have a great day.